Welcome back. The title of this particular lecture and the notes that go with it indicate that we're attempting here to make the transition between the ancient world, the early church, and the Middle Ages. And we're going to be dealing with a couple of individuals in this lecture, uh, Ambrose and Jerome, that are really contemporaries of Augustine. And we'll make a sort of a preview of what we're going to be looking at in some of the other lectures on the Middle Ages themselves. So this is one set of notes. It will be divided up into two shorter videos. So let me go ahead and get right to that. The Middle Ages, the pre and early Middle Ages, for want of a better way of putting that. And you'll see why I sort of have this awkward title here. We're beginning a series of lectures on theology in the Middle Ages. But the question is, when were the Middle Ages? The dates of the Middle Ages, variously determined, the period of European history extending from 500 to about 1400 or 1500 CE. This is one of the way that scholars speak of AD. We don't have any problem with AD, but they want to make it sort of more generic. But in any case, you got the dates there. Year 500 to about 1400 or 1500, traditionally known as the Middle Ages. This term was used by the 15th century scholars, and we're going to see that was the Renaissance scholars when we get there, to designate the period between their time and the fall of the Western Roman Empire. This period is often considered to have its own internal divisions, early, late, or early and central, or high, or late, or various kinds of designations like that. The reason for this is that the different disciplines, whether you're talking about political history or literary history or social history or whatever, have different criteria for determining the dates and eras of the Middle Ages, so-called. In our course, we're going to take into consideration the generally accepted divisions from the other disciplines, but our interest is in the history of theology. So we're going to trace developments by the theologians as well as somewhat the parallel secular history. As the side note says there, just by all accounts, the fall of Rome, we already saw one fall of Rome in 410 AD at the time of Augustine, but what's classically and traditionally understood as the final fall of Rome as such, even though there continued to be a city and even a culture after that, is dated to 476 AD, when the last Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was removed by the Germanic barbarian Odoacer, and many consider this to be the beginning of the Dark Ages. Just as a side note here, another side note here that's not listed, Roman culture continued. It was just taken over by the barbarians. So these barbarians came in and they started living like Romans and acting like Romans, and they lived by Roman law and they took Roman names. And so, again, even though one group of people known as the Romans per se were displaced by another group who took on all of the outward sort of features of what those Romans that they had displaced were living by. Did Rome actually fall? It just, in one respect, it just changed hands. But indeed, there was a general decline because the barbarians didn't run things as well as the Romans that they had displaced there ran things, and the empire went into decline. And as it says there, many take this to be the time of the Dark Ages. Some people say the Dark Ages, they apply that term to the entirety of the Middle Ages, and that's really wrong, as we're going to find out. Maybe this particular time, for a period of no more than 200 years, 300 years at the most, there was a decline of culture, but things pretty ramped up pretty quickly back up, even though they didn't have all of the modern conveniences we have during the Middle Ages. It didn't mean that it was all a Dark Ages. In historical theology, the end of the patristic era is often dated to 451 AD, and again, that's because, as we saw, that was the date of the Council of Chalcedon. Alistair McGrath writes this: on defining the Middle Ages, as noted, it's always difficult to be precise when one era ends and another begins. Traditionally, accounts of the development of Christian theology proceed directly from the close of the patristic period marked by the Council of Chalcedon to the great theological renaissance in Western Europe during the Middle Ages. The great theological renaissance, again, starts, as we're going to find out, not 1,000 years away, but much closer. So Augustine is sometimes considered to be the first medieval theologian. We just dealt with Augustine. As are his contemporaries Ambrose, who was mentioned with Augustine, because he factors into Augustine's life and story and is the next part of this particular lecture, and Jerome, who's not yet mentioned but will be the second part of this particular lecture. For our course, we will consider them to be pre-medieval. So I'm sort of inventing a new category here, the pre-Middle Ages and pre-medieval theologians, because they don't quite fit with the Middle Ages per se. They still have reference to the older ancient world, but they're not really a part of that ancient world either. So the first theologian recognized by all as definitely medieval was Gregory the Great, and we'll be talking about him in a later lecture as well. Two other theologians wrote before the quote-unquote Middle Ages were definitely underway, Boethius and a writer known as Pseudo-Dionysius. And both of these writers had a large influence on the theology of the Middle Ages, but again, they were really at the very cusp, at the beginning of what is known as the Middle Ages, and we'll be looking at both of those individuals later as well. So we're really backing up a little bit after finishing with Augustine to talk about Ambrose, who, as we said, was involved in Augustine's conversion. We saw it was Ambrose's sermons in Scripture that really led Augustine to take Scripture a little more seriously, and certainly helped to lead him to his remarkable conversion there in Milan. Ambrose was the first early church father to be born into a wealthy and powerful Roman family, which was also then a Christian family. So he's, you can see by his dates, with the coming of Constantine and the legalizing of Christianity, and then the rise of the influence of the church. Ambrose is one of the first individuals that was not somebody who came from a pagan culture into a Christian culture, or from a Roman family into a Christian family, but his family was fully Roman and fully Christian. He was born in Augusta Treverorum in Belgica, Gaul. Sorry about messing that up, but it's now Trier, Germany. The youngest of three children, preceded by a sister, Marcelina, became a nun, and a well-known Catholic icon as well. A brother, Satyrus, you can see his more Roman than Christian name there, who, upon the unexpected appointment of Ambrose to the episcopate, resigned as prefecture in order to live with him and relieve him from his temporal cares. So they were all pretty well fixed as a family. His father, Praetorian prefect of Gaul, died during Ambrose's youth, so his father was actually a Roman official. And the family returned to Rome, where Ambrose and his brother received a classical education to prepare them for government service. So they were going to follow in their father's footsteps and work for the Roman government in one capacity or another. It was of extreme advantage to himself and the church that he acquired the thorough mastery of the Greek language and literature. Again, we saw this, Augustine did not master Greek, and so some of his difficulties were problematic that way. Like with Leo the Great, he had a capacity for for a classical education that many of the others previously had lacked. Upon completion of his liberal education, he devoted his attention to the study and practice of the law. So he was going to go into government service. He distinguished himself with eloquence and ability and was appointed the office of consular governor with his residence in Milan. And so he found himself in Milan before he became the Bishop of Milan. This is the story of how that happened. It was a time of turmoil for the church in Milan because there was still a lot of ongoing conflict over Arianism. When the Arians lost the argument of Nicaea, we saw in Arianism Phase 2, they continued to agitate, and they used their political influence whenever they could to try and retrieve the ascendancy, the higher profile for Arianism within the church. And that created not only theological but political conflict. We didn't get much into that political part because this is a class in historical theology. But nevertheless, that was going on when Ambrose became the governor of Milan. That Arian controversy was still going on. So it was up to Ambrose as the governor to bring order. And he gave a speech in the basilica in which disgruntled clergy and people were assembled, and as he began a conciliatory discourse in the interest of peace and moderation, he was interrupted. The entire assembly, and Ambrose, to his surprise in May, interrupted by the entire assembly, and to his surprise and dismay, he was unanimously elected as the Bishop of Milan. So there he was giving a speech as the governor, and before he could get a speech finished, he was forced to become the Bishop of Milan as well. Upon approval of the emperor of this particular position, he received baptism, various orders, that is, he took upon himself the position of various sorts of official titles and privileges within the church. He was consecrated as Bishop of Milan on December 7th, 374 AD, and he chose to receive his office from the hands of a Catholic bishop, which was an indication of which side that he was going to take in this debate. That is, he was going to be anti-Arian and pro-Nicene. So he was a determined anti-Arian at this time, and he opposed the Arian Dowager Empress Justina's effort to seize a basilica in Milan and use that for Arianism. And that was opposing the imperial family was a risky move on his part, but he managed to pull it off, and Milan remained anti-Arian and pro-Nicene or Catholic in that sense. Ambrose lived to see Arianism largely defeated in the Western Church, and to that end, he called and presided over numerous synods. The most notable was the Synod of Aquila in 381 AD, which deposed key Arian leaders. And these are synods in the West that were seeking to undermine the influence of the Arian movement. And you can see that that was something that was key to the final defeat of Arianism in the Council of Nicaea in 381 AD, over on the other side of the Mediterranean. Once installed as bishop, in addition to his anti-Arian activities, he became a noted preacher. His power as an orator was attested not only in the repeated eulogies, but in the more in the conversion of the skilled rhetorician Augustine, as we've seen. His style was that of a man who was concerned with thoughts rather than with words. He is perhaps best remembered again for his influence on Augustine, as we mentioned a couple of times already. In 390 AD, he set a critical precedent by forcing the emperor Theodosius to do public penance for the slaughter of 7,000 persons in the circus in Thessalonica. That is, the emperor fostered a tragedy there, and it was again a remarkable thing that Ambrose managed to make him do penance for this atrocity, and he did. And it was one of the ways that you could see the church held a stronger influence than even the political powers of that particular time. He was a very remarkable churchman because he introduced a lot of Greek Christianity into the Latin Church, which what he did was he employed a number of things that made it possible for the Western Church to rise in influence. And although he tried to build a bridge between Greek Christianity and the Latin Church, a lot of his efforts didn't succeed ultimately. So he wrote 35 treatises, and were all in sort of a sermonic style to try and keep the disunity from getting out of hand, but it didn't really work ultimately. He was also a hymn writer, and a few of his hymns are even sung today in some churches, if you look up those titles. Ambrose made several other long-lasting contributions to Western Christianity. Among those was a book on Christian ethics, on duties of the church servants, and that was really more directed toward the clergy. And again, if the church had followed some of these directives, some of the corruption and problems that later developed in the medieval church might not have happened. He had a number of other things that he had wrote, not as much as Augustine, but again, he was best known for a number of his, in his theology, a number of his works that were anti-Arian. Well, we're going to stop this particular video in order to try and keep them short, and we will be returning to finish this particular set of notes and this lecture in the next video.